Hi, I'm Bob. Big Bird asked me to read one of his favorite stories, and it turns out that it was always one of my favorites when I was young, too. It's called The Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago, there lived an emperor who was fond of new clothes. He had a costume for every hour of the day. Whenever his ministers went looking for him, they found him in his dressing room rather than in his council chambers. One day, two men came to the town where the emperor had his palace. They told everyone they were weavers and that they knew how to weave the most beautiful and wonderful fabrics in the world. Not only that, but the fabric and the clothing made from the fabric had the most unusual quality of being invisible to every person who was not fit to hold office or who was dull or foolish.
What a splendid idea, thought the emperor. By wearing such clothes, I should be able to discover which of my ministers are fitted for their posts. If they cannot see the clothing, I shall be able to tell the wise men from the fools.
So the emperor gave the weavers a large amount of money and ordered them to begin weaving the cloth for a suit of new clothes. The two men set up a loom in a small room at the back of the palace. Day after day, the sound of the loom could be heard. Finally, the emperor began to wonder how they were getting on with their work. He remembered that anyone who was foolish or unfit for his job would be unable to see the new cloth. He had no fears for himself, of course, but he decided to send one of his oldest and most faithful ministers.
He will be able to see if this new fabric is as marvelous as these weavers claim, thought the emperor. He is a clever man, and no one is more capable in his duties.
So the minister went into the room where the two weavers sat working. Their hands were moving up and down the loom quickly and deftly. They pointed to the loom and asked him if he did not agree that the pattern and coloring of the fabric were the most beautiful he had ever seen. The minister stared as hard as he could, but he could see nothing at all.
I know that I'm not a fool, he thought. Perhaps I am unfit for my job. I must not mention the fact that I cannot see this marvelous fabric.
So after praising the quality and the beauty of the non-existing cloth, he went back to the emperor and gave his report. The emperor was very pleased and sent more money to the weavers, urging them to quickly finish their work. One day, the emperor decided that he would like to see the material himself, and so, with his two trusted ministers, went to the workroom where the two weavers were working as hard as ever on the empty loom.
I see nothing at all, thought the emperor. What shall I do? Am I a fool and unfit to be the emperor?
The two weavers stood waiting for the emperor's reply. At last, the emperor spoke.
It is indeed beautiful, he said. And now you must hurry and make me a new suit of clothes. I shall expect the suit to be finished in time for the grand procession and yearly celebration being held tomorrow.
With that, he left and went back to his rooms in the palace. The next morning, the emperor, with all of his ministers, went back to the workroom. "Good morning, your majesty," cried the weavers. "Look, your new suit is finished." As they spoke, they began to hold aloft the imaginary garments. The emperor took off all his clothes, and the weavers pretended to give him one article of clothing at a time. When they were finished, they led him over to a large mirror. said all the ministers.
Said the emperor. The clothes fit very well.
And turning, he walked out into the street, followed by all his ministers. And there he took his place at the head of the procession, and they all began to walk through the town. All the townspeople lined the streets.
How beautiful the emperor's new clothes are, they shouted. Just see how well they fit.
Nobody would admit that they could see nothing, because nobody wanted to be called a fool or unfit for their post. They just waved and applauded as the emperor strode by. Suddenly, a little girl standing next to her father was heard to say, "But he has nothing on." And then one person whispered to another,
The child is honest. She has nothing to lose by telling the truth.
and that person whispered what the child had said to another, until at last all the people cried out,
But he has nothing on! He has nothing on. He has nothing on. He has nothing on.
The emperor was ashamed because he realized it was true. But he thought,
The procession must go on.
so he walked back to the palace in style, followed by all of his loyal ministers, whom he realized were no more dishonest than himself. The subject of the emperor's new clothes was never mentioned again by anyone in the kingdom.